Summer of 1967, Comanche County, Kansas. Eldon Pritchard walks his fence lines outside Coldwater, same routine he's kept for years. That's when he spots a small gray figure moving calmly through his wheat. Not running, not hiding, walking as though it belonged there. He reports what he saw. Days later, unidentified men arrive, take his statement, his sketches, his photographs. Then every record of that morning vanishes. What Pritchard encountered is still debated, but to understand why this case refuses to disappear, you need to know who he was. Eldon Pritchard was not a man looking for attention. In the summer of 1967, his name appeared on the voter rolls for the Coldwater precinct of Comanche County, Kansas, a quiet, sparsely populated region in the high plains, where dryland wheat farming and cattle ranching shaped the rhythm of daily life. The Pritchard family held pioneer roots in the area, established long before Coldwater grew around the junction of U.S. routes 160 and 183. Pritchard's life revolved around the demanding, practical tasks of agriculture. Managing a 1,300-acre operation meant working long before the sun broke over the flat horizon. Every morning began the same way, checking pasture fences, monitoring livestock, and inspecting the wheat fields for pests or frost damage. This was solitary, physical labor that required a sharp eye and a realistic mind. On a ranch, survival depends on seeing things exactly as they are. Nothing in Pritchard's background suggested an interest in the unusual. He had no collection of science fiction, no history of writing to newspapers, and no involvement with the growing UFO interest of the late 1960s. He was known simply as a quiet, hard-working farmer who kept to himself. When he walked out into his fields in the early morning darkness of that summer, he was focused solely on the day's chores, completely unprepared for an encounter that would change his quiet life on the plains. At approximately 4:47 a.m., as the first pale light of dawn began to outline the horizon, Pritchard's routine inspection came to an abrupt halt. Moving through the dense, waist-high wheat on the eastern edge of his property was a figure that defied immediate explanation. It was a small, thin humanoid, estimated by the rancher to stand between 5 feet 6 inches and 6 feet tall. The figure possessed distinct, proportional limbs and a completely smooth, hairless gray surface, with no visible clothing or gear. Instead of running or attempting to hide, the entity walked with a calm, measured gait directly through the cultivated crop. Its movements were remarkably slow and deliberate, displaying none of the startled, erratic, or evasive behavior typical of a wild animal or a trespasser caught in the open. It kept a steady, straight-ahead path, seemingly undisturbed by the isolation of the high plains or the presence of the watching rancher. At one point, the figure paused. It slowly turned its head, looking directly toward Pritchard's position, before turning away to resume its unhurried pace. The sheer strangeness of the encounter shattered the familiar reality of the morning chores. There was no accompanying mechanical hum, no sudden flash of light, and no physical threat. Yet the sight of this silent, gray form navigating the Kansas wheat field transformed an ordinary summer workday into a profound, unresolved mystery. Cattle grazing near the edge of the wheat field reacted first. The normally quiet herd suddenly raised their heads, bellowing and pulling away from the direction of the moving figure. Instead of ignoring the intrusion, the animals moved together in a tight, protective group, retreating toward the far end of the pasture. At the same moment, the morning bird song stopped entirely. A flock of sparrows in the nearby brush fell silent, leaving only the sound of the wind across the high plains. Pritchard, who knew the daily rhythms of his ranch, recognized the sudden quiet as a warning. He felt a strange, heavy stillness in the air, accompanied by a perceived chill that he estimated to be a quick drop of 2 or 3 degrees. Because the rancher carried no scientific instruments, these environmental changes remained entirely subjective, recorded only through his senses and the behavior of his livestock. Still, the sudden shift in the pasture transformed his curiosity into sharp caution. He stood motionless, reading the uneasy behavior of his animals as a clear sign to keep his distance before trying to get a closer look. Pritchard reached for the 10-power binoculars he kept on hand for checking cattle. Raising the optics to his eyes, he focused on the figure, adjusting the dial until the gray form resolved into sharp relief. It was standing at an estimated distance of 150 to 200 yards, positioned deep within the waist-high wheat. For approximately 30 seconds, Pritchard watched in silence, Through the 10 times magnification, the sheer anomaly of the figure became clear. There were no seams of clothing, no folds of fabric, and no gear, just a uniform, matte grey surface that seemed to absorb the weak dawn light. The limbs moved with a fluid, mechanical efficiency. Then, the figure stopped. It slowly rotated its head, arresting its forward motion entirely. Through the lenses, Pritchard realized the entity was looking directly toward his position. The distance between them seemed to collapse. In that moment, he felt the weight of mutual awareness, realizing he was being observed just as closely as he was studying the intruder. He held his breath, his fingers gripping the cold metal of the binoculars. Part of him urged a cautious retreat, while another practical instinct told him to walk forward, cross the fence line, and demand an explanation. Yet his boots remained planted in the dry Kansas dirt. For those few suspended seconds, neither man nor figure moved, locked in a silent standoff across the quiet expanse of the high plains. The figure broke the standoff, resuming its steady, unhurried walk. It headed east, moving through the dense crop toward a faint, distant glow near the horizon's tree line. Pritchard kept his binoculars focused on the grey shape as it neared the boundary of his property. Then, in a single moment, the figure vanished. There was no sudden flash of light, no acceleration, and no sound. One moment it was walking through the field, the next the pasture was completely empty. Pritchard lowered his binoculars, scanning the area for any sign of movement along the fence line or the dirt access road. Nothing moved. The quiet returned, but the nature of the encounter had changed from a strange sighting into an immediate absence problem. The figure had simply ceased to be there, leaving no obvious route of escape. Pritchard climbed over the pasture fence and walked toward the location where the entity had just stood. When he reached the exact spot, he found nothing. The dry Kansas soil showed no footprints, no broken wheat stalks, and no physical impressions indicating a human-sized body had just passed through. No visible path led away from the site. To find some logical explanation for what had occurred on his land, Pritchard began a step-by-step ground search of the immediate area, checking the soil for any physical trace left behind. Broadening his search outward from the immediate clearing, Pritchard discovered a narrow, curved swath of flattened wheat that appeared to match the figure's path toward the horizon. The stalks were bent close to the ground, forming a distinct trail through the otherwise upright crop. Near this path, he also reported finding a slight, shallow indentation pressed into the dry soil, suggesting a localized physical weight had made contact with the earth. Pritchard noted odd sensory conditions in the immediate area, including a strange, unfamiliar odor and a peculiar texture to the disturbed dirt, though these details remained entirely subjective, registered only by his own senses during the search. The primary challenge for investigators is the complete absence of scientific validation. No instruments were brought to the field to measure the atmospheric or soil conditions. More importantly, no physical soil samples were ever collected, no measurements of the flattened crop swath were recorded, and no photographs of the ground traces have survived to the present day. This lack of verifiable, material evidence leaves the physical claims open to multiple interpretations. Localized weather patterns, such as a sudden downdraft, can easily flatten isolated patches of wheat. Similarly, stray livestock or heavy agricultural machinery can leave unusual, unexplained depressions in the dry Kansas topsoil. Without forensic data, these field traces remain suggestive but unproven, leaving a clear gap between a rancher's personal observation and verifiable scientific fact. Pritchard reported the encounter directly to the Comanche County Sheriff's Office in Coldwater. On July 15, 1967, a brief entry was logged in the Sheriff's Daily Dispatcher Register, noting a call regarding an unusual sighting on a farm. At first, knowledge of the incident remained confined to a small local circle: the sheriff, a few deputies, and Pritchard's immediate neighbors. A brief notice even appeared in the July 22nd edition of the Coldwater Chronicle before being quickly retracted by the editors. But the isolation did not last. 2 days after the report was filed, a black sedan arrived at the property. 2 unidentified men in dark suits carrying official badges interviewed Pritchard in detail. They collected his handwritten narrative, sketches, and personal notes. The men instructed him not to discuss the matter publicly, then departed with the original documents. Modern attempts to verify this sequence of events reveal a clean break in the official record. While the July 15th dispatcher log exists on microfilm, the complete incident report is entirely missing from the Comanche County Sheriff's archival holdings. The visitors demanded a detailed account of the timeline, focusing on the figure's speed and the reaction of the livestock. As Pritchard spoke, they collected every physical record he had created. They took his hand-drawn sketches of the grey entity, his handwritten notes, and the black and white photographs of the pasture. Before leaving, they gave a strict instruction. The rancher was not to discuss the matter publicly with his neighbors or the local press. This was not the passive filing of a typical rural incident report. The active collection of personal records and the immediate demand for silence indicated that the case was being actively managed, treated not as a local curiosity, but as a matter requiring containment. Today, any attempt to verify this sequence of events reveals a clean break in the official record. The Comanche County Sheriff's archival holdings contain no trace of the incident report, the handwritten statement, or the photographs. Researchers looking through the physical files in cold water found an empty space where the files covering the summer of 1967 should have been preserved. Yet, a physical trail did exist. A microfilm copy of the Sheriff's Daily Dispatcher Register, dated July 15, 1967, preserves a single line, a brief log noting a call about an unusual sighting on a farm. But the detailed files connected to that entry are gone. Under Kansas law in the 1960s, local agencies had to keep non-criminal incident reports for a minimum of 10 years. While a simple filing error, standard disposal, or a misplaced box, such as one rumored to have ended up in a county archive in nearby Pratt, could explain the missing paper, the complete disappearance of both local and forwarded files remains unresolved. Because of this archive gap, the primary written account of the encounter relies on an indirect link. Marvella Johansson, a retired schoolteacher, met with the farmer shortly after his encounter and transcribed his statement word for word onto 3 pages of paper. This transcription, kept outside of government hands, remains the only surviving description of what happened in the fields before the visitors arrived. The photographs, which Pritchard claimed showed the exact shape of the flattened path, vanished along with his handwritten narrative. Without the original sheriff's dockets, photographs, or official field notes, investigators cannot analyze the physical evidence or the initial police response. The paper trail that should have preserved the details of that July morning was severed within days of the event, leaving a silent archive where a documented encounter once stood. During the late 1960s, a series of remarkably similar reports occurred across North America. In July 1967, prospector Stephen McCarlack reported a short, featureless figure near Falcon Lake, Manitoba, where nearby geese suddenly fell silent. 2 years later, in October 1969, Texas cattle herder Luis Gonzalez described 2 small, large-eyed humanoids near Canyon Lake, an encounter that caused his herd to bolt while a solitary horse froze in place. In both instances, the events left physical traces, a shallow grid depression in Canada and a circular indentation on the Texas lakebed. Yet the most striking parallel lies in the bureaucratic aftermath. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the US Air Force conducted immediate interviews, but subsequent public record requests yielded heavily redacted summaries with missing field notes and vanished photographs. These recurring details, the isolated witnesses, the startled livestock, and the fractured official archives, show a consistent law enforcement response to unexplained rural encounters throughout the decade. Today, the Coldwater files remain empty. In our digital age, the most unsettling truth isn't what was seen in that field. It is how easily a documented event can be erased from history. Until archives are truly open, we are left searching the margins of the forgotten. What do you think happened to the missing reports? Share your thoughts below.